Welcome to the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies and today's fiscal year 2020 presidential budget review, looking at the Air Force's prospects. America can be proud of its Air Force and its airmen, but it should have maybe a little less pride when it comes to past Air Force modernization and resources. A number of factors across the past couple decades have de-emphasized America's Air Force being prepared for peer competition. And those peers are looming across the Pacific and across the ice cap. For a while, the United States was distracted with nearly a generation of nation building and supersized counterinsurgency. And at the same time, countries like China and Russia have worked to erase U.S. aerospace power advantages. With a new administration and a new national defense strategy, a new mandate was made to return the Department of Defense to focus on the peer adversary, while also continuing to deal with the implacable stability issues out there, including violent extremist organizations. So the plan was for about a 5 to 7% increase in defense spending, and we'll see today if that's the case. But how the Air Force spends its share is all about restoring an Air Force needed to enable all other domain operations. Today, we're privileged to have Major General David Krumm, the Air Force Staff's Director of Strategic Plans, to tell us what's happening with the 2020 budget and maybe beyond. General Krumm is responsible for the development, analysis, evaluation, and integration of Air Force resource allocation plan to meet worldwide air, space, and cyber requirements. His directorate also analyzes Air Force Corps mission areas and reviews legislation, policy, and operations as these relate to the total force. General Krumm is also engaged in the Air Force Global Posture Policy, international standardization, and combatant commanders' regional plan assessments. So, welcome to the Mitchell Institute, General. Many thanks for being with us here today and giving us a review. Over to you.
All right, good morning, everyone. Joel Sussman, thank you for that, sir, for that introduction, and the welcome here to the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. I guess I need to say, first off, welcome our distinguished visitors, leaders in both government and industry, and also as I look across the crowd, what I see as mentors, I see friends. And so thank you for being here on this budget request rollout week. And as the General said, I'm in the A8. Plans and programs, so I have no idea what you want to talk about. But we'll go through the budget as we go forward. And I do have to take a moment to recognize and thank the Mitchell Institute for, first off, allowing me to be here, but more importantly, for what they do for just the increased awareness in aerospace and also cyber. They inform the national security debate on aerospace power and what it provides to our nation and the world. And as I was researching to speak with all of you, I was on the website, and on about the 4th page of Google, which I know you guys probably don't get to, there was a couple of things about the Mitchell Institute mission. And there's a section of it that I'd like to quote. And it talks about what they are here to do. And kind of near the end of the mission statement, it says, quite often what we do involves questioning established doctrine, organizational constructs, and operational constructs, asking whether there is a better way to meet desired goals. And as I was there, I started to remain on the website. And I looked at some of the interviews, watched them on YouTube, and some of the articles. And I have determined that the Mitchell Institute is knocking it out of the park when it comes to questioning our budget. So that is all, you guys are kicking it down the door, which is actually a really good thing. And it's the conversation that we need to have, because these are not easy problems. And there's no clear solutions to what we want to do. And when I look around this room, what I really see is the men and women on whose shoulders we stand on today. The airmen that I serve with right now serve in the world's greatest Air Force because of what many of you did. And we're appreciative of that. And we know that we've got to continue that legacy of dominance in space, in cyber, and in the air because of what you did. And we're grateful for that. And we need to continue to engage with you. We need to have the hard conversations. We need your mentorship. We need your support. And I would actually say we need your dissent, because we need to become better at what we want to provide to our nation and allies. And John Diptula isn't here, but I need to send a special shout out to him because he coerced me over a period of 6 weeks to come talk. And I want to thank him, even in his absence, for what he does for our nation, our Air Force, and of course the institution here as well. You know, these are different times. These are really different times. You know, great power competition remains the central challenge to U.S. prosperity and security, period, dot. China and a resurging Russia are attempting to challenge us in every domain that we fight in. That's air, that's land, sea, space, and cyberspace. To face these challenges, the United States Air Force must compete, deter, and win. And that's prescribed to us in the National Defense Strategy. And I want to review the 5 priority missions that we've been tasked with. And they are: defend the homeland, provide a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent, defeat a powerful conventional enemy while deterring opportunistic aggression and disrupting violent extremists in a cost-effective manner. That's what we've been assigned to do. And I will tell you that our fiscal year 20 budget builds that lethal and ready Air Force that we need to defeat any adversary, and it's doing it faster and smarter to accomplish those 5 priority missions. And this won't be news to some of you, but I want to put into perspective, what does that really mean? What is the magnitude of being tasked with those 5 priority missions? Now, in 1990, I had just entered the active duty Air Force, and I was in pilot training. Some of you were serving, and some of you answered the call for when Saddam Hussein and his Iraqi army invaded Kuwait. And me, like a lot of my fellow members, were waiting to see what kind of airplane we would get if we could manage to graduate out of pilot training. And we watched as 34 operational fighter squadrons deployed. 34 operational fighter squadrons deployed to meet that threat, out of 134 operational fighter squadrons that we had at the time. In fact, in 1990, we still had 401 operational squadrons and about 945,000 active duty, Guard, Reserve, and civilian airmen in our Air Force. And those airmen were part of the coalition that banded together with our joint force and with our allies and partners to defeat that aggression in the Middle East. We had 401 operational squadrons to defeat a middleweight, rogue, non-nuclear power who was a threat to his neighbors in the Middle East, but wasn't a threat to the United States homeland and wasn't a threat to the American way of life. 401. Today we have 312 operational squadrons. We have just 55 fighter squadrons, down from that 134, and we have 685,000 airmen, down from that over 900,000. We're not the Air Force of Desert Storm. In many ways, we're better. The capabilities that we've developed, the techniques, the tactics that we have are still good, but we are down in capacity. And as articulated in the National Defense Strategy, we don't face primarily a rogue, middleweight nation. We face a different global security environment. China and Russia are nuclear powers. And Russia continues to violate, by the way, its treaties as it rebuilds and grows its nuclear capabilities. And so today, should deterrence fail against a major power, your Air Force will be doing something much different than we were required to do back in 1990 and 1991. Your Air Force will be simultaneously supporting not one, but 3 combatant commanders at the same time. And they will all be asking for air, space, and cyber capabilities and capacities. Then the chief laid this out beautifully yesterday. The first request that's going to come in for Air Force assets is going to be that geographic commander, wherever he or she is, to face that aggressor. And that geographic commander, they're going to ask for combat air. They're going to ask for fighters. They're going to ask for bombers. They're going to ask for ISR. They're going to ask for tankers. They're going to ask for command and control. They're going to ask for space capabilities and capacity. They're going to ask for cyber space and capacity to defeat that threat. And it's going to take a sizable force to move and do that. But because this major power possesses nuclear weapons, the Air Force will also be supporting the U.S. Strategic Command. And that STRATCOM commander is going to call so that the Air Force assets can execute the nuclear deterrence plan for our nation. And as all of you know, the Air Force is responsible for 2/3 of our nuclear triad. And when the STRATCOM commander gets ready to execute that nuclear deterrent plan, he or she is going to ask for bombers, tankers, command and control, while still maintaining our ICBM force, who's on the watch 24/7. So that's another large portion of the Air Force that will be asked for. And the third commander that we're going to be tasked to apply Air Force assets to is NORAD Northcom, who needs fighters, tankers, and C-2 aircraft. Because the major powers that we face today, it is not an away game when it comes to the conventional fight. Those major powers possess conventional capabilities that can threaten the homeland. And the NORAD Northcom commander is going to need the assets that he or she deems necessary to defend that homeland against those conventional threats as well. The Air Force is going to be asked to support these missions simultaneously, not sequentially. And at the same time, we've been tasked by the National Defense Strategy to maintain a global presence to make sure an opportunistic rogue nation doesn't think that he or she can take advantage of the situation and do aggression against one of our allies or partners. And we're also tasked with making sure that we continue to maintain campaign pressure on violent extremists all over the world. That's the stark difference between fighting a middleweight rogue nation with no ability to project conventional power to our homeland or possesses nuclear weapons, to if we can't deter a major power fighting and winning a pure fight. And as my Secretary Wilson, General Goldfein continue to articulate in every forum that the Air Force is too small for what we've been asked to do. And it's why, as the National Defense Strategy Commission stated, regardless of where the next conflict occurs or which adversary it features, the Air Force will be at the forefront. And General Sumter talked a little bit about Europe. If we're in Europe, it's an air and land fight, and it's a space fight, and it's a cyber fight. And we're in the Pacific, it's a space, cyber, air, and sea fight. And the common in those is your United States Air Force and the capabilities that we bring. And that's the reality we face. And this budget focuses on building that more lethal and ready Air Force. And we've made progress. We are more ready for combat operations than we were 2 years ago. Readiness, I think we all have to remember, is the ability for us to be able to fight. And we're ready to fight tonight as we continue our readiness. People and training are what's most important. The FY20 budget provides 4,000, almost 4,400 more airmen to augment the missions that we need them to do to support our Air Force. It also adds in funds to hire more civilians, particularly focused on depot-level maintenance, to make sure that our equipment is ready to fight tonight as well. And we've dramatically increased funds to increase the training for our pilots and our warfighters. With respect to the readiness of our equipment, we are modernizing across the board with the F-35, the KC-46, the B-21, the nuclear deterrent, the TX trainer, a refresh of our F-15Cs with F-15X, and of course, our helicopters. We continue our efforts on the next generation air dominance efforts, and we are funding technology leading efforts in hypersonics, directed energy, and engine technologies. So we have modernization going across the board, but we have been focused on cost-effective modernization as well. But we know that that modernization that we're doing right now, today's modernization will be tomorrow's readiness. Our airmen will be ready and more capable of fighting with these modernized equipment. We're trying to do that faster and smarter, as the Secretary continuously says, taking advantage of the authorities that Congress gave us in 2016 and 2017 to improve Air Force acquisition. The Secretary has stated emphatically, we cannot win this contest against a near-peer adversary with an acquisition system from the Cold War. And we're taking measures to do that. So we're speeding up the way that we do things. Delegating to the authority, to the services, it works. And Dr. Roper and his team are making incredible strides in how we are getting after doing acquisition better and faster. We now have more control over our programs, and we're taking advantage of the new authorities that Congress gave us to prototype and experiment. I want to highlight that our fiscal year 20 budget builds on the advances in FY19 and further accelerates our ability to operate in space. There's a 17% increase in our space funding to about a $14 billion unclassified space program. The Department of Defense recently submitted legislation to establish the Space Force as a new service within the Department of the Air Force. Let there be no doubt, our adversaries know how good we are in space, and they are trying desperately to attack and change the dominance that we have. And the creation of the Space Force will help us focus on maintaining that dominance. It capitalizes us being that best Air Force in the world at space and giving the new era that we have in strategic competition. I think it's a move that's going to posture us for the future. Now, it's easy to talk about, when we talk about the budget, to talk about things. So when the budget request goes across, people look at what it asks for and what it buys. But I'd like to take a minute and talk about what it means. Because our budget request is not about things. It's about winning a war together. And I know it's easy to understand how much money you put for this program, how much money you put for this platform, how many of these things we're going to have. But more often, we look at the pieces. We look at the platforms. I want you to think about the pieces as part of a picture. And those pieces fit together. And they fit together as a connected network that shares, that collaborates, that learns. It is with our joint force, and it's with our allies and partners. We don't fight as platforms. We don't fight as things. We fight together, connected, shared, and collaborative. And that's what we're trying to do with this budget as we go forward. And this connected, shared network of capabilities and capacity that we need going forward is what we need to defend our homeland. It's what we need to provide the nuclear deterrent that our nation needs. It's what we need to defeat a near-peer adversary in a major conventional war. It's what we need to do to make sure that we deter opportunistic rogue nations from trying to take advantage. And it's the Air Force that we need to get after combating violent extremists all over the world. There's a lot in this budget request. And I actually have no doubt that many of you understand pieces of it much better than I. But I would tell you that there is a lot in this budget request, but I think I've outlined it to you. There's a lot being asked of our Air Force. We are facing an increasingly complex global security environment and the emergence of a long-term competition. This is not a year long. This is not a 2-year long. This is a long-term competition between great nation states, and we have to adapt to that. The Air Force is dedicated to continue to project unmatched power through space, cyber, and the air domains. And we've done this and prioritized the readiness that we'll be able to fight tonight, and we're going to continue to march to meet our readiness goals as we go forward. And we've got to continue to build and improve the capabilities while rebuilding the capacity that we've lost over the last several decades. To do this, we need your help, we need support, but we're convinced that this budget is the right step to accomplishing the National Defense Strategy to be able to compete, deter, and win. We're kind of fond of saying it a different way, so that we can fly, fight, and win. And that's for our nation's people. Now, when I started talking with General Deptula, he said, "Hey, Cooler, I'd like for you to speak about 15 minutes, and let the people have a conversation with you." I went, "Great, sir. Well, I've got a lot of material. It looks like I'm going to be talking for about 30, maybe 45 minutes. He goes, "Oh, that's great. So after your 15-minute presentation is over, you'll be able to have a conversation and a dialogue." And that's what I really want to have today with you. And so I know you probably have lots of questions. But what I wanted to do was to share with you the idea behind this budget request. I wanted to share with you the strategy that the Secretary and the Chief have laid out to us and that we're trying to execute, and how this moves us forward and moves that ball down the field. It's a never-ending quest to get there, but we think this is the first step in a really long journey. So with that, I'm happy to take your questions and have a conversation with you. Sir.
Sir, David Isby. Thank you. Sir, David Isby, Air International. I guess although as you said, as the chief has said, focus on the highway, not the trucks. Everything comes in trucks, and in this budget, we have 56 fighters. General Holmes and Carlisle have complained about an aging force structure. What could you say about that?
Sir, thank you for the question. What I'll tell you is, with the resources that we have, we've built the best budget we can for our Air Force. And you're exactly right. I think you heard me reel off the list of different modernization programs that we have. There's quite a few, and we've got to split those resources equitably and in the right way. And we think that this is the right balance as we go forward to modernize our force structure.
Follow up on that?
Yes, sir.
Jack Catton, is there a plan in the FIDEP to grow you to the 72 per year that you all have talked about?
I think we're putting together the Air Force that we need. That 1604 is with OSD, and it'll be going over to Congress soon. And we'll be working with Congress and OSD to add the resources that we feel that the nation needs to add to grow the Air Force that we need. So I think you'll see some growth in the FIDEP. We're growing in airmen, we're growing numbers, but the Air Force we need will take a commitment of resources. Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Matt Highland, Air University Lorenz Fellow. Sir, from your perspective as a programmer, how mature is the Air Force future operating concept that the AFWIC is putting together, and how much influence has that concept had on this budget? Thank you.
First off, I'm a planner. No, Major General Nahum, who lives across the office from me, he's the problem. So here, I will tell you that in this budget and in the future planning and programming that we're doing, we are tied at the hip with AFWIC. As you probably know, the A5-8 split. AFWIC is part of the A5, and some of my best friends, General Fantini, General Highnote, all of those were over there, and we are working together, and they are marching forward on designs. What you'll see in this budget are the pieces of that puzzle that they're starting to put together. And I think that the pieces in the puzzle are going to change, and it should change based upon the threat. We don't build a design based upon what we think is best. We build a design that can beat the threat. And as the threat changes, we can expect that design to change in a continuous improvement. And we think this is going to be an iterative process for all time. And I'm very, very pleased with what they've done, some of the futures games that they've come up with. We're working hand in hand with them. And I would like to mention the joint staff as well, the J7 and the Chairman's Concept for Joint Operations. We're infusing all of that to build design. And I think you will see that reflected every time in a different way in every budget. And if it stays the same from year to year, then we're probably doing something wrong. But I would expect next year, the person that's at this podium will say, here's what's different from last year because of what we know now and the different design that we've come up with. And if it isn't that way, you should challenge them. Yes, sir.
Hi, sir. I'm Pat Hose from Janes. I was looking for the light attack experiment in the FY19 budget justification books, and I couldn't find it. And I was told that it was not broken out as a line item that year. I was wondering, what does it mean when a high-profile program like light attack experiment is not listed as a line item, and perhaps why wasn't it listed? And can we expect it to be listed when the J-books come out in a couple weeks for FY20?
You remember when I said that some of you will understand the budget more than me? You win. So here's what I'll say. I'm not familiar exactly with the line item, and I'd be happy to come back to you and answer that question. We conducted the light attack experiment. We've funded for that, and we're going to continue that light attack experiment. There was money in 18 and 19 from Congress to procure some airplanes. We're going to do that, and we're going to continue to modify and experiment with those airplanes at both Nellis and Hurlburt, and we'll continue to do that. And there is money in our budget throughout the FIDEP to continue that experiment, and if we go to procurement, there's procurement money in there as well.
When do you expect to issue a contract to Textron and Sierra Nevada for this initial batch?
Yeah, I'd have to defer. I'll give you to AQ. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Vivian Mashi with Defense Daily. I wanted to ask you about the decision to procure F-15EXs. So over the FIDEP, I believe there's 80 aircraft scheduled for procurement. And just from a strategy perspective, I understand that the Air Force needs more capacity. I understand that this is not going to interfere with F-35 buys. But what does it do for your long-term fighter buys? Does it push out any other aircraft? Does it push out the next generation air dominant 6th gen fighter? Can you talk a bit about how this impacts the Air Force down the line? Thanks.
I wasn't expecting that question. Thank you. So we are committed to the F-35. Let there be no doubt. Combined with the other joint services in DOD, I think we have around $9 billion in F-35 procurement. And we haven't taken one penny out of that program. We've added capabilities into it, so we've had to adjust a couple things, but we have the money in the program. And we're committed to it because it's a game changer. And it is everything it's advertised to be. But with the resources that we have, we know we've got to get to 72 fighters a year. Based upon the age of our aircraft, we've got to get there. We know that because even by buying the 5th generation that we're doing, we know we're going to fly 4th generation fighters well past 2030. And we've got 4 4th generation fighter platforms, A-10, F-15C, F-16, and the F-15E. I love the F-15C. It's what I grew up in. I've got over 2,000 hours in it. It is not going to make it to 2030 without incredible cost and service life extensions. And we have an opportunity right now to refresh it with very light components and light capabilities. We are not going to take one dime out of our 5th generation. This is a concerted effort with the resources we have. How do we get to 72 fighters a year? We couldn't quite get there this year based upon the capacities of the manufacturers, but you're going to see us look to get to 72 aircraft beyond. We haven't taken one penny out of next generation air dominance to fund this. We are committed to that, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure what that is yet. And that's great because Dr. Roper and his team are exploring all sorts of different technologies and capabilities that we need to go forward. And we're committed to that as well. And I think that what you'll see is this strategy, this 72 fighters a year, is where we need to go to get those capabilities and capacities that I talked about to fulfilling the combatant commander's requests for forces. And that's what it's all about. Yes, sir.
On the F-15X, just
Congress takes that decision, the budget, decides the plus of, the Air Force should not exist. Congress has the F-35s, or would the Air Force say we still want an F-15s?
If you're saying the Air Force is going to add more resources, I'm all for it. And if I told you as a kind of program guy, but really a planner guy, but if you add resources, I think the Secretary and the Chief would probably want to take a look at those resources and where are the priorities that we go. If Congress changes that to all F-35s, it'll be all F-35s. We understand that. But based upon the resources we have and the ownership costs of the platforms, we think that this is the best way that we can present the nation's Air Force and the best way that we can get to the capabilities and capacities that we have. If we have more resources, I think we need to have a conversation about what it is we go forward. But based upon the resources that we have, we think that this is the right way to go. Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir. Stu Crowell from General Thomas.
Hey, Stu.
I was hoping you could elaborate a little bit more. You could elaborate a little bit more on the network connectivity that you discussed, the system that's going to connect, share, collaborate, learn. Is the Air Force getting close to fielding those technologies that enable you to do that?
I think we're still working on a number of different items, but what the Chief has been clear to us, multi-domain C2, multi-domain connectivity, multi-domain networks is our future. And you're going to see a couple things in the budget, ABMS, as we go forward. That's going to be a big part of it. Dr. Roper has just designated a chief architect with ABMS. And I think one of the things that you're going to see us do, we were very focused by platform and capability. So when we looked at how do we go forward on a program, we were very clear to set those programs' expectations. We didn't do as good a job looking at an enterprise of collaboration and connectivity. So what we're looking at is, instead of focusing on allowing people to just focus on their platform, or just, so if it's a F-35, or if it's a TX, or if it's a B-1, or if it's a space asset, how do we level those requirements that we need to make these things connect and share across the enterprise? And that's what we're focused on doing in building the networks. And what we have to, and that's going to be a change. It's going to be a big sea change for us, because now a program manager or someone in acquisition, we're responsible for requirements across the enterprise rather than just requirements inside his or her program. So I think that's what you'll see us go. And I don't think that there's any one thing. There's no one piece that's going to define our network. It's going to be a series of different ways to connect, because we don't care the manner in which they connect. They could connect via fiber, they could connect via HF, they could connect via UHF, they could connect via different ways. But it's the data and the standardizations that will allow all these things to talk and collaborate with each other. So I don't think you're going to see one single line in the budget that says, here's how we're going to connect everything. It's going to be an enterprise effort across all those things. Wow, a lot more hands just went up. Yes, sir.
Jim Laducci, Air Force Association National Director.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate your comments about asking us to look at the big picture and not focus on things. But let's face it, most members of Congress aren't going to do that. They're going to focus on things, whether we like it or not. So how are we going to try and steer that conversation from things to what you talk about, the big picture and capability and capacity, or is it just going to have to give up and defend things?
Sir, I think if you read or watched the Chief's and the Secretary's testimony yesterday, you saw it. They talked about what this means and what is the big picture and what is the strategy and where we need to go. I think you'll see it in the 1604 report for the Air Force that we need. That all threads together in that picture that we're talking about. And you're right, sir, I can't stop people from looking at pieces and things. But the way the Chief has told us to go out is, it's not about a thing. Every time, if you're just talking about a platform, that's not right. What you need to talk about is, how does it talk? How does it share? How does it learn? How does it collaborate? How does it work with our joint force? How does it work with our allies and partners? That's what you need to talk about. And that's what we're trying to do as we go forward. We'll always have to come back to the piece of that puzzle, but what we got to do is describe the picture in which that piece fits in. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks. Jen DiMassio from Aviation Week. I had one follow-up and then another question. The follow-up's about the F-35. Did you suggest that there's a problem with manufacturing capacity, and that's the reason that you requested the number that you did? And then secondly is a space acquisition question. How is your office going to work with the Space Development Agency and then work separately with traditional Air Force space acquisitions?
The first question about capacity is more of just lead times. And this is something new that we're doing. And so it just takes a certain amount of time to, when you tell a manufacturer we'd like to build, you have to remember when we put requests for aircraft in our 20 budget, don't quote me exactly, but it's about 2 years. So it takes that long to bring and build the capacity of those things. I think if you talk to the different defense industries, they will tell you different timelines that they need, but they need some advance notice in order to be able to do that. And so I think that that's just a reflection of where we could go. I'm sure that they have more capacity, but we don't know if they can get to 72. I'd have to defer to them to answer that for that. On the space question, my office probably isn't going to be with the Space Development Agency for the most part. I think obviously this is something that's brand new, it's standing up, and I'm probably not the best person to answer on how we're going to do that. I think that's more of the acquisition and the research development as we go forward. They just come to me after they come up with their really good ideas. Yes, sir.
Morning, John Turpak, Air Force Magazine. The budget says that we've now maxed out our manufacturers for munitions. And I'm wondering, is that going to continue through the FIDIP? When do you get to equilibrium or a place where you're comfortable? And what happens after that? Do you get to a steady state, or do we return to up and down cycles of building and expending?
First off, a great question. There's probably areas of it that I probably can't touch on in an unclassified setting. We are committed to purchasing our munitions, and we know we need to grow the stockpiles of munitions that we have. What we also have learned through some bumps and bruises is that a steady commitment to procurement when it comes to munitions is the best way to preserve our industrial base and our capacities that we may need to accelerate in terms of high usage if we go to war. So I think we'll take those lessons learned and we'll look to see how can we make sure that that's a steady stream of funding and programming so that the industrial base isn't having to react to sine waves in procurement. That's an incredible lesson that we've learned as we've gone forward. Because quite frankly, a company can't afford to keep people standing around not building anything. And so we've got to project out that a little bit better. Yes, sir.
Sir, I'm Bertiel van Geel, Netherlands Air Attaché here in DC, one of the allies, I should say. You mentioned the importance of strengthening alliances and partnerships as part of the National Defense Strategy in the Great Power Competition. Are there specific programs or actions that the U.S. Air Force has in mind for the next year?
I think that as we look forward, we have a number of programs that we are already committed with our allies and partners. F-35 is probably the signature for that. I think that there's probably a way to partner in some other areas as well. We will continue to, when we do our light attack experiment, we'll continue to work with our allies and partners across the world to understand, you know, the chief has talked about, when he talks to the chiefs of the other air forces, they talk to him about, I need a turboprop, or I need a turbojet, or I need a rotary device, or I need manned, or I need unmanned. We need to work with that in that experiment to go forward and understand our allies and partners a little bit better. But one of the things that we understand going forward, allies and partners, it's not just a political statement. It's the capabilities and capacities that they bring that are incredibly essential to us in the fight. And we've got to look for more specific ways to do that. And again, I think the F-35 is a big poster child for that. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, sir. Paula Trimble, Lewis Burke Associates. You talked a little bit about technology acceleration, and the National Defense Strategy talks about a national security innovation base. About a year and a half ago, the Secretary started this S&T 2030 evaluation. I know it's been completed and is sent back, and how has that influenced the FY20 budget submission when it comes to S&T, and what's the status of the S&T 2030 study?
I can't speak to exactly where the S&T 30 is now. As with many things, when things enter the Pentagon, they are hidden, and we don't talk to each other in the Pentagon, so sometimes it's not. But I think we're close to that. I would anticipate the Secretary is going to review that, make her changes, and announce it at some point. I just don't have that timeline when she's going to do that. I think S&T has always influenced our budget. If you look, we're well above what the Secretary told us to do in S&T in this budget, above 1.9%, and we're going to continue to do that in a number of different ways in both, in budget speak. I'm kind of getting away from I'm not a programmer, but the 6.1, 6.2, just kind of core foundational things. But what I really think you'll see in both this budget and in our future budgets is a real big increase in the 6.3, and then 6.4, not technically S&T, as we really work on experimentation and prototypes. Dr. Roper has been phenomenal at pushing our S&T community to not just come up with great ideas, but great ideas that can transition to our force. And so I think that's what you're going to see in our budget. Yes, sir.
Morning, sir. William Glasgow. I'm a NRO IMA, but I'm mobilized to run the Integrated Mission Management Program at DIA for the Combatant Commands.
Okay.
My question, though, is really as a member of the Strategy Markup Language Committee, and I came here this morning to be able to offer up the strategic markup language, which is an ISO standard to help with what you do as a strategic planner for the Air Force. And basically asking for an opportunity maybe to chat with you before you leave today and let you know how the OODA loop inside of your stakeholders, everyone's intent, and the results can be in a format that allows for people to collaborate and harmonize the things that make your job as tough as it is.
So your question is an offer of help.
Yes.
Do you hear that? Yeah. Can we make that the standard? Absolutely. I'd be happy to talk with you afterwards, or anytime. Yes, sir.
Sir, Chris Good with the Roosevelt Group. Just your third question on light attack. Small program, but obviously a lot of visibility to it, and experimentation is one thing, procurement is entirely different, with consequences to the entire market, light attack market. So from a plans, I'll stay away from acquisition because I'd be interested to know how you're going to acquire these 6 aircraft, what authority, but from just a plans perspective, what do you think the end state plan is in terms of who will own those aircraft? Are they going to be U.S. Air Force owned assets, or will they be partner nation owned assets? Thank you.
So again, on the acquisition piece, I'd have to defer to AQ. I think it's fairly clear in the authorities in FY18 and 19 about the procurement dollars for that. But again, I think that that's something that I'd go over to AQ on. As far as where we're going with those aircraft, we're going to modify them and we're going to continue to experiment. And the great thing about experimenting is we're not bound by anything. And so I think we'll have some different avenues to talk with AFSOC, with SOCOM, with ACC. How can we experiment within the Air Force, outside the Air Force? How do we bring in those allies and partners to see what we're doing and get their feedback? So I think the answer to your question is it can be any way that we want. And that's the great thing about experimentation. And, getting to the experiment versus procurement, those are completely separate things. And then we just want to make sure that we're focused on doing this the right way. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for being here. This is very interesting. I'm Shay DeLutis. I'm with Clark Construction, and my question has to do with Tyndall Air Force Base. It was significantly damaged in last fall's hurricane season. So what is the Air Force plan for Tyndall? And is the plan to regain its capacity as it was prior to hurricane season? And if so, what is the timing, the urgency associated with that?
I was stationed at Tyndall Air Force Base twice. And I was the commander of the F-22 squadrons down there. So it's a near and dear place to my heart. We're fond of calling it L.A., Lower Alabama, because I'm from Alabama as well. I will tell you that we have funds in FY20 to continue to work on Tyndall. But I think the Secretary said this very clearly yesterday in her testimony. We need a supplemental to rebuild Tyndall which way we want it to be. And we've looked at it can be the fighter base of the future with the F-35. And I think that is where we'd like to go with that. It will require funds that aren't currently in our FY20 request to build it. But we think we have a unique opportunity, and the convergence of it's a tremendous disaster. And I want to just say right now, the men and women down there went through just hell. And what the wing commander and his people have done is absolutely amazing, and it just makes me proud to what they're doing. But we're going to need, and we have a unique opportunity to take that destruction and make something really great out of it. We're talking about a base of the future with energy and how do we build and incorporate. We've almost got about as clean a slate as we can to go forward. But I think it's going to require us working with Congress on what's the right supplemental to our budget to get that to the base that we want. But I think that's the future. I think it could be absolutely the guiding beacon for us as we go forward. I've stunned you into silence finally.
I've got one last question.
Yes, sir.
I know you talked a little bit about what's the thinking, feeling in terms of prospects for
Future budgets. Are we going to continue to see some growth? Is it pretty much topped out? Can you review a little bit on that again?
Sir, if I knew that, I just can't answer that. Here's what I do know. There's a lot of needs that our nation has, and that we have presented a budget request with the resources that we've been allocated. We think it's the budget that brings you the best airspace and cyber force that we can. I think we've made the case on what the nation needs out of our Air Force. The nation needs to grow our Air Force, and that will require a change in resourcing. I can't predict how and when that's going to happen, but I know that going forward, the Secretary-in-Chief has been very clear about the Air Force we need to grow the Air Force, and that will require a different level of resourcing. I wish I had that crystal ball. I might not be in the Air Force if I had that kind of crystal ball, though.
You had that crystal ball when you were in the cockpit.
Go ahead. Oh, yes, sir. You can just shout if you want.
I talk pretty loud. Thank you. Kevin Walker, Aerospace Corporation. You mentioned 17% increase in the space budget. Is that top line total budget? Is that just investment dollars? Does it include launch? If you just add 2 or 3 boosters, that could signify that whole change.
That 17% is an increase to our unclassified space program. And I can't tell you exactly line by line what it is, but it's the unclassified increase as we go forward.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Pretty good. Last question?
General, you made it. And we didn't have to have your guys evacuate the building just to get you off the stage.
I had him stand next to the fire alarm just in case.
Thank you very much. We've got a gift from General Deptula. Of course, it would be from General Deptula. It's a biography on Curtis LeMay by Warren Kozak. I just want to read one line in here. LeMay was, at the time he was in Washington, was a little critical of some of the four-stars. He made this statement. He said he would only make an accommodation when it looked like his argument was lost and there was no other alternative. Quote, "If you believe in something, damn it, you go in there and fight for it." So I would like to thank you on behalf of Mitchell Institute and our audience here for really fighting to get us a good deal on this budget this year.
Thank you, John.
You
Very
bet.
much. Thank you for this.
Thank you.